So good morning. Welcome to the wonderful ZOOMIE that we've been planning on for a few months here. I'm Michelle Geiger-Bronski. For those of you who have not seen me on screen or in person, I'm the founder and president of the County Scottie Rally, and I cannot tell you how excited I am today to have Wally and Robert join us for this very informative program. And I think we may have a special guest or so at the end as well. Um, just a couple of reminders. It's on the screen for you. Housekeeping details. Please make sure that your device is muted. The fact that you are on here is giving us consent to record you, so your image may show up. If you don't want your photo shown, then go ahead and put yourself on not mute, but on your screen as opposed to you. We are doing this as a part of our mission of reaching out and doing education for the Scottish Terrier community. The County Scottie Rally is a nonprofit organization, and we welcome and appreciate all donations. It's things like this that donations do that make things like this program possible for us to take care of and broadcast and record and send out and all of that kind of stuff. So after today, if you want to go back and listen to this, it will be on our ZOOMIE page. So you'll be able to see that probably after tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Robert. Robert Bogart comes to us from Northern California, actually. And in terms of his background, he's a software engineer. And probably the most passionate thing he has in his life is that little sweet little dog. And I think we all will understand that fully after his presentation. So in his work for Google, it's an interesting story how this all came to be, and I'm going to allow him to share that with you. And so I'm just going to go ahead and turn things over to you, Robert, and thank you very much for being here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to a bunch of willing participants as opposed to having to cram some of this down people's throats, which is what I normally do, whether they want to hear about it or not. Yeah, so thanks for the intro. I think you pretty much covered the high points. And yeah, so like Michelle said, my name's Robert. I'm Wally's dad, and what I'm planning to talk about today is our journey through lymphoma from the date of diagnosis to remission, molecular remission. And I can also get into some of the details concerning the different levels of remission if that's something that people want to hear about, if they're curious. But otherwise, yeah, we'll get started. So I'm actually presenting from Bellingham Veterinary today in Bellingham, Washington, and I'm in Derek's office. Derek was the primary tech that handled a lot of the heavy lifting for Dr. Sullivan when it came to treating Wally. He made a lot of house calls, even came down to the Bay one time for Wally, and came to our hotel all the time at night, sometimes like 3, 4 in the morning. So I don't know when he rests, to be honest. But anyway, I'm in Derek's office, and that's where I'm presenting from. So yeah, so the agenda, I'm thinking, I'll introduce Wally, talk about things like his age and the circumstances. The way this particular disease works, it exploits the lymphatic system, and so it's kind of important to understand how that works in order to understand lymphoma itself, and also some of the various stages of progression. And when we were able to detect lymphoma in Wally, we got really lucky, and I'll get into that too. And then the treatment and some of my own personal experiences along the way, and how Wally's doing today. And yeah, feel free to stop at any point and ask questions if something doesn't make sense, or if I didn't cover something that's that's on your mind. Again, I'm not a medical professional. I'm a software engineer, so I had to learn a lot really quickly in order to understand what was happening and exactly what some of the recourses that we took to remediate the disease meant. So, you know, well, I did learn a lot. This is definitely not my my area of competency, but yeah. So let's see here. Next. So yeah, Wally is about 10 and a half now, a little over 10 and a half. And he was diagnosed in October of 2023 with B-cell lymphoma. And for anyone that's had a dog that's passed from lymphoma, you know that you don't really have much of a chance of survival, you know, if you don't do anything beyond chemo. And there aren't too many options. And in particular, there aren't too many other places in the country currently that offer these additional options. And so, you know, sadly for a lot of dogs, this is it's lymphoma it's fatal. It's a death sentence. So they gave him an outlook of poor, and this was at Sage Veterinary in Campbell and in California. They did a phenomenal job, and I credit them for keeping Wally alive long enough for me to figure out what lymphoma was and what the next step would be after chemotherapy. And then furthermore, after figuring that out, they kept him alive long enough for me to get him here and get him on the table and get him treated. So, and Wally's primary care team was Dr. Sullivan, who I'm hoping will be around towards the end of this presentation to speak and answer some of the more technical questions if we have any veterinarians or oncologists on the online. Derek, which you already know, you know of, and Alex Brumfield, who was basically right there with Derek. They were sort of a two-person team, and they did so much for Wally. I'll never be able to repay them for everything they've done. So these guys are amazing. I mean, they work 7 days a week. To be honest, it's like you want someone that's looking out for your dog that does work 7 days a week, but at the same time, there are many times along the way where I questioned whether or not their schedule was really sustainable just because of how much they do. So these are really special people up here, and with a lot of stamina, more than me. All right, so do you think Michelle, do you think people are interested in hearing, you know, about lymphoma and some of the specifics and the lymphatic system?
I do.
Okay, cool. So first of all, lymphoma is a hematologic malignancy, which in layman's terms essentially means blood cancer. And it originates in the lymphatic system. And that was one of the things I kind of wanted to talk about is what the lymphatic system is. And it's basic. Think of it as like an internal drainage system or a defense system in your body. So it's a bunch of like little vessels. They're networked together, and through cleaning stations that are referred to as lymph nodes. And your body is constantly, you know, it's producing this tissue called, or this fluid called lymph, and it's basically ushering it through the vessels in the patient's body, or the whatever, whether it's a human or a dog, and along the way, you know, meets these checkpoints, which are those are the lymph nodes. They're small organs, and inside of them, they've got a number of cells that comprise your immune system, like B cells and T cells, also called lymphocytes. And these cells will identify and dispose of any infection or anything that's deemed as being pathological inside the fluid once it reaches the lymph node. And so, and you know, and afterwards, after everything's been cleaned, the fluid is returned to the bloodstream, essentially, and you know, whether it's a canine or a human, they can go on living their life, ideally disease-free. And so, lymphoma is a disease where one of these white blood cells, which are the B cells or T cells inside of the lymph node, become cancerous, and they begin to divide and spread. And if the patient is not, if they don't have the immune response that's needed to identify these types of cells and dispose of them, then you end up with progressive disease. And you see this is one of the reasons why the lymph nodes can get really big and hard. Sometimes you see that under the neck, and that's just basically a ton of cancer cells that have been growing and increasing in population within the lymph nodes. And it will spread throughout that network and eventually into organs and stuff if allowed to progress. And there's lymphoma can kill somebody, whether it's like I said, whether it's a human or a dog. It doesn't work too much differently either way, but it can kill someone in a variety of different ways, which I can get into some of those further on in the presentation. But that's the basic gist of the lymphatic system. And so with lymphoma, there's basically 5 stages, and each one of these they're kind of broken up into 2 parts, where the dog or human either is or is not showing signs of some kind of systemic illness. So for example, it could be the case that in stage 1, only a single lymph node is impacted, meaning like it can be seen or felt, and usually the texture feels like with Wally, we felt something that was almost nodular right underneath his neck, and sometimes it can be like a hard marble, but his was almost peanut shaped, so it had like this strange hourglass type of shape to it, and it was hard. And usually it's a single one, like a single lymph node at first is how it presents. And then in stage 2, you see multiple lymph nodes kind of in the same region. So maybe you see a couple pop up in the neck, 1 or 2, or maybe it's like one's in the neck and like one is in the prescapular, which is basically what Wally had. He had one that showed up in his neck, and then he felt something in a prescapular area. And stage 3, you start to see this, it starts to work its way back in the patient. So it may start in the front of the dog, up in the neck, and you'll start to see these appear maybe behind the arms, like in the armpit, or in the back of the legs, behind the knees. And this is stage 3. Now I color coded these for a specific reason, and to be honest, I'd prefer to just put them all in red, because that's how bad I hate this disease. But the reason why stage 3, 4, and 5 are red, besides the obvious fact that they're more fatal, is that stage 3 is usually 3, 4, and 5 are the most common stages where we diagnose patients. Meaning, sadly, like a lot of dogs that have this disease, it goes undetected up until stage 3. And so yeah, once you get into 3, you start to see these kinds of hard marble or peanut shaped like lumps in a lot of different places around the body. Stage 4, the liver and spleen get involved, and 5 is pretty rough. 5 is everything's pretty much impacted. Even the bone marrow starts to fail, and even the brain. So this can even work its way up into a very privileged area of the body, and it can even impact the brain if allowed to progress. And so, as you can see, there's a number of different ways this may kill you. I mean, ultimately, you can die from organ failure, you can die from infection, you can die from something involving the neurological system. So this disease does a variety of damage to patients. It's horrible. And so those are the 5 basic stages. And I kind of wanted to discuss some statistics here. So based on some of the, I won't call it research, but I will say a lot of studying that I did, it looked to me like a number of sources corroborate the overall incidence being anywhere from 7 to 25% of all types of cancers. And as far as blood cancers go, it comprises 85%. So there's a number of different kinds of blood cancers you can still have besides just like B-cell lymphoma. You can have a T-cell lymphoma, for example. You can have leukemia. Leukemia is really aggressive. Like none of these cancers are good, but if you're going to have a blood cancer, to be honest, B-cell lymphoma is probably the one that's generally the least aggressive. despite the fact that it's terrifying. They're all terrifying. There's no evidence yet that the gender of the person or the dog plays any role in whether or not they develop lymphoma. Although they have, I guess, there is some kind of I think it's like female dogs that haven't been fixed. What is it? Yeah, it's intact female dogs. They have a slightly reduced risk apparently, but take that with a grain of salt because I don't know if that's 100% true, but that was one of the numerous things I read in a research article, was that intact females are less likely to develop this disease. And of course, usually this develops, when a dog is middle-aged or when they're a senior dog. We're starting to see it earlier and earlier now, and particularly in purebreds. And it seems to be most prominent in some of the ones that I've got listed here. Golden Retrievers is a big one. It probably the biggest. But it's not, obviously not just Goldens, Boxers. It's a lot of purebreds. And why? Some of it has to do with the breeding strategy that's used by the breeder. Like I said, I'm not an oncologist. I'm a software engineer. So as far as all the causes of lymphoma go, I'm not qualified to take a position on that. But there are a number of known causes. You go out there and check it out for yourself if you're curious. And if you have a golden retriever, let me know. Like, I'll send you Dr. Sullivan's phone number. It's a nice insurance policy to have, because this guy, if anyone can save your dog, it's Ed Sullivan for sure. And Michelle, I don't know if people can unmute or if people are allowed to speak, but if it's definitely okay with me if people ask questions along the way, because I'm blasting information and I don't know how much people how much this makes sense to them. It makes plenty of sense to me as I did this, but now I'm seeing this for I've been looking at this for a year now, so it's a little different for me.
If you're comfortable with that, Robert, we can allow that. If people do that, though, I just ask that you be respectful of the time that your question takes up, so that Robert can get through his presentation as well.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I want people. This is really for you guys. I want to give as much information as I can, and I want everyone to be armed with a lot of the knowledge that I didn't have the first time this happened to us. And if I knew then what I know now, this would have been a lot easier. It wouldn't have been fun, but it would have been a lot easier and possibly cheaper.
And Robert, if I can just interject, if I could ask everyone to identify yourself by name, where you're from, and most importantly, have you ever had a dog with lymphoma? Because I think that would be very helpful to know. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so all right, let's see. So Wally. So how the heck did this happen to Wally? And how did we find it? So first of all, we got really lucky. We probably caught Wally's lymphoma, but somewhere between stage 1 and 2. He had strained the back of his leg, and so he was walking around limping, and it was kind of it wasn't going away. It didn't seem to be getting better there for a while. It was like several days in a row. So we finally I took him to the vet. I was there. My wife was out of town at the time, so I just took him to the vet and made an appointment. And when we were there, he got checked out. His leg was fine, but I had mentioned I thought it was really strange that the dude had been drinking a lot of water lately, like a ton. He was really thirsty. And it turns out that that's one. It's not necessarily a sign of a malignancy, but it is one of the symptoms of patients that have lymphoma, is they become really thirsty. They can become really thirsty. And so, like in Wally's case, he was just drinking all the time. And so when I had mentioned that, the doctor had started feeling around his neck, and that's when he found a small marble. And he said, at the time, he had said, this could be a number of different things, but we can't rule out something like lymphoma. It could also be allergies. So there's a number of things that could cause this that aren't necessarily fatal. But he said, just to be safe, let's just take a sample, send it to the lab, and we'll perform some tests on it and see what happens. So they took a sample and they performed what's called a PCR test, polymerase chain reaction. And Michelle, if I can explain what that is in layman's terms, if that would be helpful. It's imagine you have this sample of blood cells, and maybe only a very minuscule percentage of them are cancerous. Maybe it's just one. You have millions, and maybe it's just one. You're trying to find essentially a needle in a haystack, and a PCR test is think of it as like a super powered magnifying glass that can find the smallest needle, and then what it does is it basically takes that needle and it makes millions or billions of copies of it so that it becomes detectable. And there's a technique that's used that consists of a sequence of heating and cooling cycles that will cause certain, not all, but just this particular needle to increase in population until it's finally observable, if it's there. If it's not, you'll know. And they consider a PCR test to be probably the most accurate measure of whether or not a particular genetic sequence that they're looking for is present. This is not just, for example, this isn't just used on people or dogs that have cancer. It was also used, I believe, during the pandemic to identify whether or not there was COVID present in someone's body. So PCR can be used for a number of different things. It's not specific to cancer, but it is used to detect cancer. And if a patient comes out negative from a PCR test, you can take a big sigh of relief. It's, for all intents and purposes, they don't have lymphoma. And if the PCR comes back negative after a patient has been diagnosed with lymphoma, and they're considered to be in the highest form of remission, also called molecular remission. There are two other levels of patient is in cellular remission, and then the least accurate, the least specific one is called clinical remission, and that's what Wally was in after 6 months of chemotherapy, which I'll get into later. But clinical remission essentially states like they do a blood test and they count the number of white blood cells in the sample, and if it's within an acceptable range, then and the dog's not showing any signs of systemic illness, and the blood chemistry looks okay, then and the lymph nodes, one of the most important things with clinical remission or any type of remission really is feel the lymph node, and it should start to it no longer has this hard texture to it. It's almost squishy, think of like a blueberry that's been a frozen blueberry that's been thawed out. So you could take it with your finger and almost roll it, and it should also be substantially smaller too. So clinical remission is to me, I don't even take that seriously anymore. Wally was in clinical remission and he relapsed like less than 4 weeks later. So clinical remission, all that means, in my opinion, is that the chemotherapy seems to be taking the patient in the right direction, but that's about it. If you get clinical remission, you have not won yet. You need molecular remission. So that PCR needs to come back negative. Then you can relax for a little while. So anyway, we got lucky. We caught it somewhere between stage 1 and 2. So it was very early on, and thank God that he had that strain to one of his back legs. Otherwise, it probably would have ended up catching it in stage 3 or 4 once he started to show some real signs of being sick. Which, to be honest, throughout this whole procedure, Wally never showed any real visible signs of being sick from lymphoma. he's sick of a lot of things. He's sick of me, you know, he's sick of Dr. Sullivan. He's sick of having his blood drawn, but you know, he was never visibly impacted by the disease itself. So this is in October of 2023, and like I said, it was a diagnosis of B-cell lymphoma, and the standard protocol is usually to just start them on chemotherapy, which we did, and it's called CHOP chemotherapy. And even though it's funny, because even though the acronym CHOP, each one of those letters in CHOP stands for a different type of chemotherapy drug, and each one can do something a little bit different. So the C is cyclophosphamide. The H is, I don't know if I can pronounce this. The H stands for like hydroxydonorubicin. The O stands for oncovin, and the P stands for prednisone. So those are your 4 drugs, and like I said, each one does something. They try to attack the problem in a different way, and I couldn't necessarily tell you how each one does, but for example, I know one of them will try to deprive the body of a certain amino acid that we know cancer cells need to survive. So it'll almost try and suffocate the cancer in a way. We avoided prednisone when we started our first round of CHOP, which was like a 6-month course. We avoided prednisone because it has a reputation for increasing appetite, and also if there's prolonged usage, it can cause diabetes. But we've also seen some really remarkable results on lymphoma when prednisone's used, because it's also steroid. And we've seen, 1 or 2 shots of prednisone, and boom, that lymph node just shrinks right down. So we wanted to keep that in our back pocket in case we started to really run low on time, and we wanted to see if we could get remission first without the use of prednisone for all of the reasons that I mentioned. So the doctor at the time told us, the oncologist at Sage who was treating Wally, really great guy, he said, statistically, especially dogs with B-cell lymphoma, about 85% of them will respond to chemo the first time around, which is pretty good. So we had a pretty good feeling, that this was going to at least get us some time. And we've heard stories of dogs doing chemo and staying alive, with a reasonable quality of life for years, 2 years, maybe 3. Like, they still have progressive disease, but a lot of these rescue chemo protocols, like the use of prednisone and some of these others, seem to hold it off for a while. And so we were pretty hopeful. At this point, Wally he was almost 9, and we thought we could do chemo maybe once, and then if he relapses a year or so later, then we'll start a second round, and we could probably negotiate our way into 3 or 4 years. Didn't happen. It didn't happen. So statistically, most dogs will react positively the first time around, and we started to see the lymph nodes shrink almost immediately within the first, I would say, 3 weeks of receiving chemo. It was 1 dose a week, and then I would say the next 4 or 5 months, progress came a lot more slowly. So we had 1 lymph node that just didn't want to get soft. It just stayed hard for a long time, and over the course of 3 or 4 months, it finally kind of went back to normal. And we declared him in clinical remission. And we celebrated and had a little party for Wally. And he graduated from his chemo course and everything. And it was maybe a few weeks later, I just felt really paranoid. And I said, I know it's only been a few weeks, but I want to go back in there and get him checked out, just to make sure we're still doing okay. And that was when the oncologist told us that he had come out of remission and that his lymph nodes had started growing again. And he had told me, we can do chemo again, but just be advised that the response rate is much lower the second time around. So maybe only half as many respond positively a second time around. So it may not actually hold the disease. It, may not hold it off this time. But I said, I don't care, like, press play, like, do the chemo now, and we can, we talked about switching up the protocol to new drugs that we hadn't tried before to see if maybe that could make a difference. And we didn't do it for very long. Maybe we got about a month into the second round of chemo before I discovered Bellingham, which I'll get to later on in the presentation. But so yeah, 6 months of chemo cost us in the Bay about 30 grand. And we don't have pet insurance, so we had to, Wally paid out of pocket, but if you have pet insurance, the vast majority of this is covered, actually. And if I can bring in Derek or Sullivan towards the end of the presentation, they can probably make recommendations in terms of, which insurance providers are the best and which ones have been known to cover treatments like chemotherapy or stem cell transplant. He, like I said, the oncologist in the Bay, he told me like half as many dogs respond the second time around. So, things don't look great for Wally. This is probably close. We're getting close to the end of the road here. And that was tough, man. Sorry. That was really tough because he didn't even know he was sick. So this is a picture of Wally and I the day he relapsed. And you can see he looks happy, right? Like you can't tell there's anything wrong with him, but he's about to die. And I had no backup plan. But I told him basically, I read to him the same speech that Winston Churchill had made during World War II. And I told him, especially because he's Scottish, he's a close relative of those guys. And I basically told him, I said, we'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight on the landing grounds, we'll fight in the fields and the streets, and we'll fight in the hills, but we'll never, ever surrender. We'll never give up. I said, I'll never leave you. You have to leave me because I'm not going to stop fighting. So I got online. I did a bunch of just frantically searching for any other option beyond chemo that I could find. And I found a number of things that sounded promising, including some immunotherapy options in UC Davis, which sadly I was never able to even get an appointment with them. And then there's a number of holistic options that were known to be very anti-cancerous. Chinese herbs like turkey tail and certain mushroom extracts. And so, of course, we ordered all this stuff, and I made a list of everything that all of these options, and I brought them with me to Sage for the next chemo treatment that Wally had. And we're kind of going through the list, and in the middle, I have bone marrow transplant, because this was a video that I came across a video of how a bone marrow transplant works. And so I'm like, all right, add it to the list. And I just add like a sticky note, and I was just writing all these things down. I take it in to Sage, with Wally's next appointment, and I show it to the oncologist, and he's going through and kind of nodding like, yeah, those supplements that's been known to be helpful. And yeah, there are some immunotherapy options which might be helpful. And then we get to like the bone marrow transplant, which is right in the middle of this list. And he gets real quiet, and he just kind of starts nodding his head, and he goes, that'll work right there. He's like, that'll do it. Bone marrow. He's like, you get him a bone marrow transplant, he has a very good chance of overcoming this. He says, too bad you can't, because your dog's not in remission. Well, it turns out like that's kind of true, but it's not completely true, and which is something else that I'm about to cover. So the truth is that whether or not you're in remission doesn't necessarily matter. It depends on what kind of bone marrow transplant you get. And So based on, like I said, I discovered Bellingham Veterinary through a video that I saw on YouTube, where a guy named Steven Suter gives a presentation concerning canine lymphoma and stem cell transplantation. And he kind of discusses, what the two basic types are, as well as a number of other things that I think it's very important that people know this. He said basically, dogs were the model that were used to develop a number of the existing protocols that we have today for humans. So we did a lot of, researchers did a lot of experiments on dogs where they performed bone marrow transplants on them specifically to see how much of a match makes a difference. And of course, if you perform a transplant on a dog, with using stem cells from a donor that's not a match at all, what kinds of things happen? So dogs really sort of paid for our treatment in blood. And one of the things that Dr. Sullivan did was he went down to Fred Hutch in Seattle, and he took all of the research, all of the papers, and all of the information that they had recorded concerning stem cell transplantation in dogs, and he brought it back with him to his clinic in Bellingham, this time to treat dogs as client-owned patients as opposed to research subjects, with the intention of saving their life. So it's a really great way to give back to dogs who really given us, so much, really, in the same way. So now we can give back to them, which is great. So I found out about Bellingham Veterinary and Ed Sullivan through the Suter video, and so I looked them up online, got the number, called them immediately, and Derek answered the call, and I said, I need a bone marrow transplant now. I want a bone marrow transplant as soon as possible. And he said, oh, okay, like hold on, slow down. Like, let me send you over some information, and so you can see what it's gonna require from you, and what the commitment's gonna look like. Because he did say the aftercare was involved. He wasn't kidding about that, that's for sure. But I said, no problem, send it. But like, I'm gonna have my records forwarded today for you guys to review. I don't need to think about it. There's no time to think about it. We're doing this, like, I'm pressing play. And so, I sent all the information over. They reviewed it, and that night around 5 or 6 p.m., I still remember where I was. There's specific moments throughout this journey that stick with you. You never forget, and this was one of them. I saw my phone ring like around 5 or 6 at night. I was outside with Wally. We were just kind of watching the world go by, and the phone rings, and I answer, and Dr. Sullivan introduces himself, and he says, so listen, I've reviewed Wally's records and everything, and he goes, I want to help him, and I think I can. I really think I can help him. He goes, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. There is a way out of this for Wally. Why, either a patient does or does not necessarily need to be in remission. So there's two types of bone marrow transplants that you can perform. One's called an autologous bone marrow transplant, and that's where you use the stem cells from the patient themselves. This is okay if the patient is in remission. So if they're in remission, then you can harvest stem cells from that patient, and then what you do is you put them in the fridge, and then you give them full body radiation, 2 days worth. And exactly how much radiation kind of also depends on the size of the dog, but you give them 2 days of full body radiation, and the radiation affects cells in the body that divide quickly. So that's going to be obviously cancer cells, and but it's also going to be cells that are in the bone marrow tissue, and cells in the GI tract. So it's very normal. For example, after receiving radiation, full body radiation for a couple of days, you'll see GI problems where there's a lot of characterized by diarrhea, vomiting, lack of appetite. Those things will eventually subside, but the big thing to note here is that the rate back in, they'll go through the bloodstream, soak into the bone marrow and expand, and once again start to produce all of the blood cells that you need to survive. It's like various kinds of white blood cells, platelets for things like clotting, if you get a cut, hemoglobin. So that's why these stem cells in the bone marrow are so important. But obviously, like if you use your own stem cells, you can't risk harvesting something that's contaminated, which is why it's so critical that the patient be in remission. If you find, by contrast, if you find a matching donor, then it's a little bit different, you know, because now we're performing a harvest on something that isn't sick. And so it doesn't really matter at that point whether or not Wally's in remission. So long story short, we did find a matching donor, and her name's Lisa Frazier. She's, I mean, amazing. There's no, I mean, I could talk about how amazing Lisa is all day. One of the most incredible, most kind, humble people that I know. And I would say that she's basically dedicated her life to being a type of public servant. But amazing woman, amazing human being. The added benefit that you get from performing an allogenic bone marrow transplant, which is where you get your stem cells from a donor, is that the new immune system that eventually regrows in place of the one that's been destroyed is in the image of the donor now. So while all of Wally's blood cells are no longer his, they're all his brothers at this point. And that new immune system, if it sees any cancerous cells lingering in the body that somehow the radiation missed, or they just happen to survive the radiation, the new immune system will identify and deal with those cancerous cells. And so, because that's really, you know, why he had progressive disease in the first place, was that his immune system just wasn't doing it. It wasn't identifying them as being the pathological disease that it is. And so, yeah, so that's the basis of the two types of transplants. So you really get sort of anti-cancer properties afterwards if you get an allogenic transplant. And you know, Suter from NC State published a paper that Dr. Sullivan had co-authored that essentially it said that canines with high-grade B-cell lymphoma that receive an autologous bone marrow transplant have between, like, I think they concluded it was between the 33 to 40% chance of long-term survival or cure, which is not bad given that chemo offers 0. And that patients that receive an allogenic bone marrow transplant have around an 89% chance of long-term survival or cure. So those are really, really favorable odds. The key is just to find the matching donor, and we just got really lucky. So I posted Wally's pedigree online, and you know, basically I was going through all the Scottish Terrier forums on Facebook and finding every single one that seemed to have like a high population of members first, although I blasted as many as I could indiscriminately just to get this out there. And this information ended up eventually coming across Lisa's screen, and she contacted me, and that's how basically how I found our matching donor. Yeah, and so, and his name was Bennett. He was a rescue. So that's actually kind of an interesting story. So Lisa runs a Golden Gate Scottish Terrier rescue. So it's a rescue for Scotties in the Bay. And Bennett, Wally's brother, was a rescue, and they found him 2 years prior to Wally's diagnosis. And they just happened to, for whatever reason, they just happened to love Bennett so much that they decided to keep him and not rehome him. And Bennett, it's funny, Bennett had the same father as Wally, but Bennett's mom was Wally's aunt. So moms were sisters, but common father. So that was the situation. I guess they considered that a 3/4 sibling. And just so everyone knows that the probability of a direct litter mate being a genetic match is 25%. And so with Bennett, you could probably split the difference since it was the mom was a sister, and we said probably 18.5% chance. But lo and behold, Bennett turned out to be a full match, 100%. Yeah, which to me was just miraculous. And I think this was, for me, this was the point in this whole journey where I felt like we're finally going to take the offense. Like we've been backing up this whole time and just trying to find ways to survive, but now we're going to come after this thing in a big way. And it was probably the breaking moment in this whole thing where I just didn't feel some amount of despair, and I felt like there was hope. So yeah, that's how we found Bennett, and he's a lot like Wally. It's funny how their personality types are very similar, and they have the same eyes and facial structure. It was pretty funny actually to see how much of this is genetically influenced, including their pretentious behaviors. So here we have a picture of Dr. Sullivan on the right, and that's Derek on the left, and this is Brother Bennett on the table, and we're holding up here the stem cell harvest. So the way that we extract stem cells from a patient, from a donor, is they put them on a drug called, they administer a drug called Neupogen for about 5 days. And this causes the patient to start to produce a lot of these stem cells in the bone marrow, and then push them out into the peripheral bloodstream. Okay, and so once there's a lot of these stem cells in the bloodstream, the patient is considered to be what the term I think is called mobilization. And so when the donor is fully mobilized, then you can begin the procedure of extracting the stem cells. And what that looks like is they sedate the donor only because they don't want him moving around while they're trying to draw the sample, basically the sample. And they put 2 catheters in. One takes the blood, it goes through a machine, and it separates out the stem cells from the rest of the blood, and then you give the blood back to the donor. So it's really not invasive at all. The whole thing, start to finish, both with Bennett and everything that Wally went through, was nothing more than needles. No incisions, no drilling, no cuts, nothing. Just needles. So that's why I have a hard time understanding why somebody would say that a bone marrow transplant is too invasive when there's really little going on there besides needles. It's really not invasive, and I think we need to make sure that people understand that we're not drilling into bones or doing anything that's that dangerous, at least not anymore. And we haven't for a while. So this process is called apheresis. And in order for this to be successful, you need like a certain number of these progenitor cells or stem cells in order to ensure engraftment. Otherwise, there's a chance that the original immune system can grow back and overtake the one that we're trying to introduce if the one that we're bringing in isn't high enough in volume. And so when a patient grows back their old immune system as opposed to receiving and accepting the new one, that the term for that is called auto recovery. So once you give anybody, whether it's a human or a dog, a bone marrow transplant, you don't want to see auto recovery. That's really bad. So what they told us was they needed between a minimum of 2 million of these cells in order to ensure that the patient would engraft. Engraft meaning that they would accept the new the donation, and they would start producing blood cells in the image of donor. They needed at least 2 million, and an ideal, a max of 4 million would be good. And they said if you only get 2 million and you don't get 3 or 4, what we were told was that's okay, and that what that means is that it just might take them longer to engraft, but that they eventually will engraft, and that eventually all of their blood cells will be 100% donor. It just might take a little longer. So we were really hoping that we got at least 2 million. We were understandably concerned. You know, Bennett is actually a year older than Wally, so we didn't know how he would respond to the Neupogen and if he would produce as many stem cells as a normal dog would. Well, turns out, like I said, we needed at least 2, maximum of 4. Bennett gave us 14 million. So, in fact, Bennett gave us so many stem cells, and he did it in such a short period of time that, and Sullivan's been doing this for 20 years. He said it's the most successful harvest he's ever seen in his career. I can't explain that. If he's around when I finish up for the technical QA, maybe he can, but that I was really surprised and thankful for that. So we got the stem cells we needed, and we moved forward with the bone marrow transplant. Wally's in here now. Wally is coming. Can you close that? Thanks. All right. So, what does treatment look like? And maybe I just want to pause for a second and see, does anyone have any questions so far? Don't be afraid.
Robert, we have one question thus far. How can our dogs become donors?
That's a good question. So back when I was begging for bone marrow, I told people, call Bellingham Veterinary, and they'll mail you a kit, and you take that kit, go and take it down to your local vet. They'll do a blood draw, and all the instructions for exactly how much blood is needed is in the kit. And then all you have to do is package it back up. It comes with an ice pack, and send it back to Bellingham. They'll then, what they've been doing is running, they've been sending this down to Fred Hutch in Seattle. And that's where the DLA matching has been taking place. So yeah, and it takes to see if there's a match, it takes it can take a while. It's because they do these in batches, and so ideally, if they don't have like a full batch ready at the time, because they do a number of patients, Fred Hutch does at once, and so it depends on kind of like where you end up in the sequence of things. Like if you're at the very beginning of a batch and they haven't fully loaded it yet, like with other samples that they intend to also test, then it could be like 2 weeks. It could also be as short as like a week. So we got really lucky, and we heard back probably in about a week later saying that Bennett was a full-blown match. And we had other kits already in the works. Like we had other people submit blood, and we were going to test them next. But Derek basically told us, let's first test Bennett and see before we do the others. And the reason why is because A, he's the most likely to be a match, and B, it's really expensive. And so he didn't want us to have to spend money if we didn't have to necessarily. And so there's obviously that trade-off between money and time, but you're talking about a week or so. So it wasn't not necessarily a big deal, but we had, like I said, we had other friends that submitted samples too. And to give everyone an idea of how much it cost to perform the matching between Wally and Bennett, just the two of them together, it cost $5,000. And if Bennett wasn't a match, we would have started testing other samples from other prospective donors too. And for each one of those follow-ons, just to fingerprint that dog, it would have been $1,800 per dog after that. So it adds up. So understandably, Derek didn't want us to spend a whole bunch of money for no reason. So he said, let's just see what happens first with Bennett, and then we can test the other samples if this doesn't work out. And Bennett, we just got so lucky, and he was 100% match. Yeah, so that's kind of that was basically that's how the matching for us worked. Anything else? Any other questions?
The same person asked this follow-up question: do they have to be related?
That they don't necessarily have to be related. It's not a requirement, but statistically the odds of them being a match is much higher if they are related. It's it's very possible that like you've got a matching donor that's somewhere in Croatia. It is possible. Yeah, I would say definitely the same breed, but as far as they don't. like a direct relative isn't necessarily required, but the odds go way down, way down. Because like I said, a direct litter mate is 25%. So, but yes, it is possible, which is why I said if you're even remotely related to Wally, or even think you are, like, please call Derek and have him send you a kit. I was pretty overwhelmed by the response from the community. A lot of people called Bellingham asking for kits, and some of you guys are even in this call right now. And to you guys, I say thank you. Like, yeah, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for responding so quickly, and for being willing to do something that you probably didn't even completely understand at the time, just to save my dog's life. I didn't understand it completely at the time. So um, yeah, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so let's see.
And
Yeah,
then
dog's
Robert,
done.
while you're just kind of recollecting your thoughts here, there's one additional question. And Marcia Dawson, who is the chair of the Health Trust Fund of the Scottish Terrier Club of America, happens to be on this ZOOMie. And
Yeah.
Marcia, this might be more appropriate for you to answer, so I'm just gonna invite you to jump in. The question came from Suzanne and Steve. And the question is this: can you get any helpful info from the STCA DNA bank?
It depends. Like, I don't know a whole lot about what kinds of information is there. I would say, like, at a bare minimum, the STCA, the Health Trust, I think that does have information on whether or not at least a dog has a history of cancer, right? So there may be some things you can figure out from there, but like I said, I don't know what information is there. So I see that, this is just me personally. I see, like, at least as a first use case for the Health Trust, the STC Health Trust, I see them helping inform breeders on whether or not they should even breed two dogs, because there's a lot of ways to deal with lymphoma, and I think another one that we should really consider is just breeding it right out of our dogs entirely. And I definitely think we can use STCA Health Trust to help with that. That isn't so there's something called DLA typing, and DLA stands for dog leukocyte antigen. So like I said, samples are taken from both the dog needing the transplant and the potential donor, and they're sent to a specialized lab, and that analyzes the DNA to identify genes that make up their DLA system. And these genes come in a number of different versions, also referred to as alleles. And yeah, and a combination of these alleles are called haplotypes. And so the process reveals, like, this unique DLA fingerprint for each dog. And the goal is to find a dog whose DLA haplotypes are as close as possible to the recipient's. And a perfect match means the donor and the recipient have the exact same DLA genes. So it's not all of their genes, it's just specific genetic sequences within them. And close relatives is where your best chances are. And of course, if it doesn't work out, then you do what you do the only thing you can do, which is you just move either further up or down the family tree, depending on who's still alive that you can get in touch with. Sadly, my breeder did not help at all. She didn't take my phone calls. She didn't answer my emails. I was able to, in fact, I thought maybe she wasn't receiving them until I called from a number that she didn't recognize, and she answered. And she said, "Oh yeah, like, you're the guy that's begging for bone marrow." I mean, not in those words, but she said, "You're the guy that's looking for bone marrow." Yes, I am. I am looking for bone marrow. Please help me. But I didn't get anything from her. So sadly, I was really surprised, to be honest, and disappointed. So I don't. If the TCA Health Trust doesn't have the information that we need today to, for example, essentially become a type of bone marrow registry for Scotties, I think I think maybe that's something that we add to the list. I think it's something that we I mean, I would definitely be on board with aiming for, and I would try and help. I would volunteer to help expedite that process, or you know, I volunteer to help in whatever ways that Marcia, you need, or any of your colleagues need. Let me know. Like, I want to help, and I can involve Sullivan and anyone else that we think could make a difference there. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. The short answer is, I guess I don't know, but at least everyone knows what, how a matching donor is identified now. So, okay, so yeah, so this is the machine here. Can everyone, Michelle, everyone can see this pretty clearly, you think?
Yes.
Cool. So there's two pictures. One is kind of like what the entire room looks like, and you can see on the left there, there's this structure that almost looks like a cannon, and this is the thing that's shooting the radiation. And you can see to the right, you see what looks like almost like a hot dog bun, which is what they put Wally in, and he receives the radiation. So 2 days in a row. And what they did each day for an hour, and what they do is about 30 minutes on one side, and then they pause. They flip Wally around so that the other side of his body is exposed, and then they do like another half hour, and that's 1 day. And then they come back on the second day, and they do the same thing again. So consecutive days. It's it has to be consecutive, and this is basically, they sedated him for this, as you can kind of tell. But what's kind of funny, and Derek was kind of laughing about this when we went through this, you could see his ears are still sticking up, even though he was out cold. I don't understand that one either. That was pretty funny. Yeah. So after the radiation, like after the second day of radiation, he immediately received his stem cells, which you can see here. He's still sedated, and they kind of got like this pinkish color, and they soak into the bone marrow, and it would start to expand. But it doesn't happen right away. So even though he's received radiation, and even though his existing bone marrow is now presumably done for, it still takes time for the existing blood cells that are in his system to die off. And so, we're doing blood work pretty regularly every day after the radiation, and you don't necessarily need to hospitalize a dog immediately anymore. That was one of the things I think that's changed over the course of the last 5 to 10 years. Is after radiation, they used to think you had to hospitalize the dog immediately, but they still have white blood cells in their body that are fighting infection, and so you don't necessarily have to do that. You monitor those counts, and when they drop below a certain value, then you hospitalize them. And so it was probably about 2 or 3 days after his second course of radiation that we hospitalized Wally, and he went into a little room. Let's see if we have it. Here it is. Yeah. So isolation. It's a HEPA filter. So HEPA filtration. HEPA, HEPA stands for high efficiency particulate air filter, and it purifies the incoming air and removes something like 99.9% of particles with 0.3 microns in size. So bacteria, fungal spores, all that stuff gone, clean in the air. So he's in this classroom, and he was there. Well, so while he's in isolation, we can see the white blood cell count drop. And at some point while he's in there, it drops to absolute zero, which I think freaks out a lot of people, myself included, and who are uncomfortable with this kind of a procedure. I've never heard of this before. To have literally no immune system at all, it sounds terrifying. But Wally's white blood cell count did drop to absolute zero. And we kind of waited, and then suddenly, like a day or two after that had happened, all of a sudden the white blood cell count went up to 100. And then, by that afternoon, it was 350. And then by the next day, he was like at 900 or something. So yeah, you're kind of holding your breath up until that point. Like, okay, is this going to work, or is it going to be rejected? And, but I mean, he was a full match. So I think I was probably the only one that was worried. Yeah. So he started to produce blood cells. Meanwhile, he may still have, it's possible that there's still some of his own residual blood cells around, but not many. He's, those are gone. And he's all donor at that, that point moving forward. Yeah. Any questions about that? No. Let's see.
We're good to go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I agree. Extremely disappointed with the breeder's response. And I probably shouldn't say something like this without my lawyer present, but like there was a small part of me that was tempted to try to wear a ski mask and break into her house in the middle of the night and steal those records of owners that she sold litter mates to, because she did admit that she had them. I considered it. But thank God I found Lisa. And yeah, Lisa's actually a retired cop, so like breaking and entering, like I don't think that would have sat too well with her. But thankfully she saved my dog, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah, but yeah, that was a huge disappointment. The aftercare. So this one's tough, man. There's a, like when I talk about the procedure with a lot of people, they everyone's so focused on the cost, the money. And I get that because it's not cheap. It's definitely not. It's going to take, it's a financial commitment. But in my opinion now, having gone in one end of this and out the other, and we did have to tighten our belt, here and there to make this work financially. But I can tell you the aftercare is the most difficult part, guys. That's the barrier. That's the barrier. It's that and the logistics of the process, because it's, you have to find a matching donor. You have to travel yourself. You have to transport yourself and your dog up there. You have to convince them to do the same. And most likely someone that you don't know, unless of course you own your own litter mate. And so, it's obviously if someone's helping you, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to help you. So, we coordinated with Lisa and we covered all of her expenses along the way, including staying up here in Bellingham for the duration of the harvest. Thankfully, she didn't need to stay the whole time that we did. She was kind of, her and Bennett were kind of in and out. They were here for a few days and we got to hang out and have a good time, but then she headed home. But the aftercare is rough. It can be really rough. And like I said, the radiation, it impacts the GI tract. And and that's the start of it. But then afterwards, especially if you get an allogenic bone marrow transplant, it's very normal for patients to experience a phenomenon called GVHD, which stands for graft versus host disease. And at a high level, what this is it's where it's a condition where the new immune system sees healthy tissue in the patient as a foreign pathogen and attacks it. Okay, so you can also see a similar kind of situation, for example, with organ transplant patients. It's the same thing. Immune system, healthy tissue, they don't like each other. And it's expected to subside. And it, even in Wally, it did eventually, but man, it took a while in our case. He had some pretty bad GVHD. And, this, like I said, this surfaced in a number of different ways. He had really runny eyes. He got some sores on his skin and even on the pads of his paws. He lost the fur loss that you can see kind of in this picture here. That's just radiation. That's just straight up radiation. And it even turned some of his fur copper, which you kind of can't see too well in this particular shot. But there's another one I'll show you in a second where you can see, his fur kind of turned copper. And also all kinds of, we had super high elevated liver enzymes, like ALP was one, ALT. And people think, and I've seen it's been like the Nothing But Scotty's forum. I sometimes I kind of chuckle to myself when I see people rightly concerned about elevated liver enzymes going, oh, my Scotty had 400 ALP. I'm really concerned. When Wally's GVHD was raging, he had an ALP value that was like multiples of 1,000. It was like way beyond the hundreds. We're talking above 2,000. It was pretty crazy. And you'd be surprised how long dogs can live in that area. But that doesn't mean like you shouldn't do anything about it. You should do something about it. But it's, yeah, so liver enzymes. And for us, the big thing was the loss of appetite, the skin problems. Those were some of the big ones for us. The sores kind of went away. It didn't take too long. We also found out along the way that he had some other issues that were probably exacerbated by this whole procedure. Like, he turns out that Wally has irritable bowel syndrome. So he's on a drug called Tylosin daily now, which has helped a lot with that. I mean, he eats all the time. His stools look completely healthy, and he's no longer having a problem there. So the challenge is finding the right combination. For us, was finding the right cocktail of immunosuppressants to sort of take the edge off of this GVHD, but also you don't want to suppress the bone marrow too much, because you need that to fight infection. And if there's any remnants of the cancer around, you want it to attack that too. So it's a tough balancing act, and it kind of feels like you're steering this slow moving ship where you make an adjustment to those meds. You don't see the impact that it has for probably at least a week, at least bare minimum. You can only start to see the beginning of the changes after a week. So it was tough. It took us a while to find the right combination and find that sort of that Goldilocks, that sweet spot in terms of the dosage and the frequency. We did eventually get it right. But he was exhausted, man. He was really, really tired, and he wasn't eating. That was the big thing, is that he wasn't eating during a lot of this. And so, we went into this weighing about 30 pounds. And by the time we finished and we were kind of coming out the other end, he weighed 20. And it took a long time. I mean, because, he was missing hair. So he's got, and his skin is damaged. So those things require a lot of protein in order to regenerate. And so at first, we're pumping him full of food, and all these resources are going towards hair growth and skin regrowth and repair. And it took a long time for him to finally start packing on some pounds again. It took a while. So yeah, it's tough. The other thing that I've talked about in some of my over it. Real quick around the crunchy. Great question. One, in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but I think they've maybe done one or two. I can tell you is that when we came to Bellingham was the only option. And because I know so much about Bellingham and I know very little about Chattanooga, if one of you were to contact me and ask me what to do if your dog was diagnosed, I would say, come up here now. That's what I would tell you, only because I know more about this place and it's a known quantity to me, and they saved my dog's life. And they're really, Ed Sullivan's been doing this for 20 years. So really, really good at what he does. He's a pro. Yeah. So yeah, he needed a lot of rest. Let's see, where are we? Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So here you can see this is Wally here. Poor guy. He's on the left. This was him kind of when he was at the worst. You can see you can almost see bones now on the left, and you can see he's a lot thinner. You can see where the copper is in his face, expressed on his muzzle there. And if you zoom in closely on his mouth, that's just skin. There's not even fur in those areas. So he lost fur all over his body. You could see some of it even on his shoulders. And of the stuff that he didn't lose, it kind of turned copper. So yeah, he's definitely not feeling good. In this second picture here, you can see we've got 3 different kinds of food out in front of him. And this is in the hotel. He wasn't interested in eating any of it, not even cheese, nothing. This was really difficult because, aside from the obvious, which is we know he needs to eat, to survive and he's losing weight, we also have to give him drugs. And the vehicle for doing that for us had always been food. And so he's not willing to accept food. And so, we had to basically pin him down and shove pills down his throat. And I hated it. I really hated it. He would cry, and you can see here, we made him a little cave where he can hide out and it's dark. He really hated having the pills shoved down his throat, and it got to a point where he hid from me. He was afraid of me because he thought every time he saw me, I was going to try and pick him up and shove pills down his throat. So he was really scared. He didn't understand what was going on, but we had no way to get the pills down his throat. So he needed those to survive. So for the itchy skin, because one of the symptoms of GVHD, like I said, it can be a lot of skin issues. He got really itchy skin, and so he was grease pigging everything you could think of, just like rolling around on the carpets and rubbing his skin. And I grew my beard out at the time, so it was pretty rough. And then when I'd carry him around, he would rub his head like this into the side of my face. That kind of helped him. And then but we found like a dog wash here in Bellingham, which is where you see this picture on the far right. You can see him missing some fur there on his shoulder still. And we give him, there's like a medicated dog wash. And so we put this medicine on his, medicated shampoo on his skin, and it helped relieve a lot of the itchiness and the irritation and the inflammation. And you can see he's a little happier there. He's kind of smiling. But this lasted for a while. Oh, right. By the way, so one of the things I was meaning to cover, which I say in a lot of my posts, but I think a lot of people probably miss it, is chimerism. So chimerism is it's essentially a measure of what percentage of the patient's blood cells are donor versus original. And this is a very, very important measurement because it's used to predict the long-term survival of a patient. So chimerism, the root word in chimerism is chimera, which is it's like in Greek mythology, I think it's used to describe a type of animal that has like a lion's head, a goat's body, and a serpent's tail. I think that's what it is. I mean, I could be wrong, but it's some combination of those three animals. And likewise, I guess Wally is kind of a combination of animals now, right? So, chimerism should always be at 100% after he's received an allogenic bone marrow transplant. If it's a very important measurement. So we were doing chimerism and PCR tests usually together. And once Wally was fully engrafted, meaning that the chimerism result was 100%, he really never dropped. He never dropped below 100, thank God. Usually relapse, if it's going to happen, most of the time it happens within, say, like the first 30 to 90 days of a transplant. Though that doesn't mean that Wally is necessarily cured, but he is in molecular remission still. But as Dr. says, cancer is always a foe. You can never turn your back on it, ever. So we try not to use the word cure too much, even though there's a lot of research and statistics that support the fact that we probably have to worry about lymphoma, and it'll be something else instead. But you always have to keep an eye on it. So we'll probably do PCR tests and chimerism tests for the rest of his life, quarterly at this point. So maybe 4 times a year. So yeah, I lost a lot of weight. And then Wally today. Whoop, there we go. Wally today. So happy dog, molecular remission. You can see he's grown back all his fur. In fact, he's fat. And yeah, he's a little tyrant. So he'd been in bed for about almost 6 months. He didn't even want to get out of bed. And so we started walking him again, and we take him around the neighborhood, and I bring the wagon too, just in case, because at some point he gets tired. And so we put him in the wagon and pull him the rest of the way. And the goal is just to get a little farther every time we walk him before we have to use the wagon. But he loves his wagon rides too. And you can see, like, Wally is, to be honest, all Scotties, I think, are pretty well known for being rather stoic dogs, but Wally tends to be even more stoic than most Scotties. And so to even get a smile out of him, like I'm getting in this middle picture, is a big deal. I mean, he's really happy. That's generally what that means with Wally. And yeah, so he's doing great today. Still negative for lymphoma. And he's, to be honest, he's, I could not get him to eat at all when he was recovering. But now, I mean, I actually at night I have to move to a place in the house where there is no food, because if me and food are in the same place as Wally, he's going to be lobbying for me to give that food to him no matter what, at all times. So that's why after he has his dinner, I usually go, like, either to where my study is and do stuff in there, or to bed, honestly, because I just, the begging is intense. He's trying to make up for lost time. But yeah, he's doing great today. He's pretty happy. All right, the costs. I think a lot of people are curious about this. So, like I said, we didn't have insurance, so Wally had to pay for this in cash. And 6 months of chemo cost $30K. This is in the Bay, San Francisco Bay. So it might be cheaper wherever it is that you live, whether it's in the Midwest or on the East Coast or in the South. I don't know, but things just generally tend to be more expensive in the Bay. It's just the way it is. Donor matching, $5K. That was all we had to pay. Thank God. The allogenic bone marrow transplant was $40K, and that covered, that covered the radiation. It covered the obviously, like, the stem cells, giving him all of that stuff, and the apheresis and the hospitalization, and blood work, lots and lots of blood work. And for platelets. So platelets are, this is an interesting one, because we're doing these regular blood tests to ensure that he's, the new immune system platelets you have. You may have like 30, the machine's telling you, because due to clumping. Together, necessarily that easy to get an accurate read of how many platelets, just to make sure, because obviously if he gets cut, he bleeds out if there's no clotting. So that's the other cool thing about Bellingham Veterinary, is that this is also a blood bank. So platelets are really, uh, it's a biotherapy company that started by Teresa Westphal, and they form of adoptive T cell immunotherapy. So exposing them to dead. What happened? Hello? Hello, can people hear me?
I can
Am
hear
I
you. I'm
muted?
not sure.
Okay.
Occasionally there's been a break in the verbal communication that comes across. It's like there's buffering going on. And I'm not sure if it's on my end or your end. I now have high-speed fiber, so
Yeah, I don't know. It
but
could also be, it could be
we
Zoom too.
yeah, we can see you clearly and hear you.
Okay, cool, cool. I don't, I got like halfway into this before I fell off. So I don't know what the last thing was people heard.
You were on the very end part and talking about the company.
Okay, Aurelius. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know people heard adoptive T cell immunotherapy.
No.
Okay, so it's a biotherapy company started by Dr. Sullivan and his wife, Dr. Westfall, and they specialize in adoptive T cell immunotherapy for canines with lymphoma. And as far as like I had to sign an NDA actually, so there's not a whole lot I could say about the some of the gory implementation details, but you can Google like Aurelius Biotherapy and go to their website and see what's publicly what they say publicly about it. But it's, and I also probably shouldn't say too much about what the results are because they haven't been published yet. But I can tell you that the results were really positive and really encouraging. And we've seen dogs that were treated with nothing but the Aurelius T cell immunotherapy and nothing else. And I will say they've done really well. So one of the other things that we did when we got the stem cell harvest from Bennett was we took some extra blood in order to uh, so that they could create 4 doses of this Aurelius adoptive T cell therapy for Wally. And he received one of those, I don't know, it was probably about every 2 weeks after the bone marrow transplant. And each one of those, I think, was like around 7.5K. And yeah, but like I said, shockingly successful among lymphoma patients that that have had no other treatment besides that. It's really incredible. And in fact, I feel comfortable saying this because I saw it with my own eyes. I saw a dog that had been diagnosed with lymphoma stage, it was like stage 4. And this was during the pandemic, during shelter in place. And, almost at the end of the road, did not have a matching donor. And Sullivan found a way to those. Um, yeah, yeah. How's the network? You guys can still hear and see me?
Yep.
Okay. So total costs, 123,000, I would say, about roughly. We didn't we didn't pay that all at once. Obviously, we put a lot of it on the credit card, and then we pay the credit card off, and even then, these costs are things that added up over the course of time. Now, the truth is that Wally had a lot of other problems too that we had to address, which I didn't bother including in the costs here because your dog probably doesn't have those. Like he had to have a couple of teeth extracted. He had IBS. We had one time we had a scare where the chimerism came back at 99%, and so we got to Bellingham as quickly as we could in order to perform more tests to see if it was a false positive or if this was real. And it turned out to be it was a false positive. So, or a false negative, however you want to say. But yeah, so we incurred a lot of costs along the way that were due to pre-existing conditions that, like I said, your dogs may not have. So this is what it costs. This is what it takes to beat lymphoma today. And I get it. Like, I know this is expensive. I know it is. And I know not everybody can do this. But the one thing I would say to everybody who ends up in the unenviable position that we did is ask for help. Ask for it, right? The worst thing they could say is no. Ask for help. I'll help you. And I know a lot of other people that would too. Sullivan will help you. A lot of people will help. And the other thing is, how do we drive the cost down? We just need to have more people doing this. guys. We just need to have more people that are willing to get a bone marrow transplant for their dog. And the more of these that we can do, then we can drive the price down, in higher volumes. And if I have to be the one to pay the premium first in order for that to be possible, I'll do it. I don't care. Like I told Sullivan, I'll sell my car, sell my house, if that's what it takes to save Wally and any organ I have two of. Save my dog. Pull out. He said, that's what he said. I'll pull out all the stops to save him. And so, I think ask for help, guys. That's you don't know unless you ask. And I promise there are a lot of people out there that they love your dog too. They see their dog in your dog, and they don't want him to die or her to die. And they also don't want people that they don't even know to experience the kind of crippling grief that I felt when I thought for sure I was going to lose Wally. Wally's the first dog I've ever, I've ever owned personally, where I'm completely responsible for his life. And, that day that he relapsed, a year ago, a little over a year ago, before we went to Bellingham, I just, like I said, he was looking at me like everything was fine. You could see in that picture, he's smiling. And I just thought, but I don't have a backup plan. And I could almost feel it coming out of Wally. Wally said, "Don't worry, I've got one. It's called you." And if you really believe that, and you accept, if you're charged with that responsibility, and if you internalize it and accept it, it's a pretty heavy responsibility to bear. But I was in the driver's seat, and and surrounded by people that had said, "Well, you did everything you could do." And I've done some hard things before in my life. I haven't necessarily done them well, but I've done some really hard things. And, at the point when people said that I did everything I could do, I just didn't feel like this had been hard enough yet for me to be able to say that. And so I found a way. I found a way, and that's what I was going to do: find a way or die trying. But you get so much out of this. We've met some really amazing people. I've learned a ton about cancer, and I also hope that through this treatment and through spreading, my experience and the limited knowledge that I have on the matter, that I can motivate and inspire other people to want to do the same. Yeah, and like I said, the big thing is ask for help. People will help. So another thing I want to say about Dr. Sullivan is, one of his nicknames here is the homeless vet. I mean, this guy he's actually known for going out and finding animals that are literally homeless and treating them and taking care of them. In fact, I one of the other things I saw with my own eyes when I was here is, one morning I was in the, we're in the waiting room ready for our, coming in for our usual morning blood draw. And I saw a homeless person checking out. They were leaving just as I was coming in. And I saw, the woman at the counter basically said, "No charge today." And by the way, she reaches under the counter and pulls out 2 bottles of medicine and says, "And Dr. Sullivan is donating these to you." So amazing people here. Really, really amazing people. I mean, it totally restores your faith in humanity. If you're struggling there, come to Bellingham Vet. It'll change everything. So yeah, this was pretty much our experience, start to finish. We're doing great today. I want to stick my head out into the hallway real quick and see if either Derek or Dr. Sullivan is here to answer any technical questions that you guys might have, if that sounds good.
Great.
Okay, be right back. He's here. Awesome. Great. Yeah, good news. Sullivan's here. So
Awesome.
I think we're going to get the Wizard of Oz here, guys. The guy behind the curtain, the man.
Maybe we could do a collective Aru.
Yeah. Yeah, man. There he is.
Hey, nice to see you again. Nice.
I didn't tell him much about Aurelius except that Wally received treatment. So whatever you feel
Okay.
comfortable saying, obviously. You know.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm not the man who saved Wally's life. Robert is. I'm just the one who helped him do it. And we had a group of people here who all helped. And so that one, I have to say for all of you guys, you know, if it weren't for you and for Robert and Stephanie and everybody else, I wouldn't need to be doing this. I wouldn't need to be a vet even. It was all for you guys. So Robert saved Wally's life. I just helped him. The transplant process, you know, is a complicated and many step process to it. Doesn't work every time. However, as we do it more, we get better at it and start discovering new methods that we can use to help them and to achieve successful outcomes, even when a dog comes in with enlarged lymph nodes like Wally did, which 5 years ago we wouldn't have even done a transplant in that situation. But with the new things that we know now, manipulating the immune system after the bone marrow transplant, things like that, that's all really advancing the level of what we're doing to allow us to do curative treatments when we didn't really. It was a hopeless thing. It was hopeless a few years ago. So it's not hopeless right now. It's really a matter of trying to put all the steps together and doing as much as we can to try to achieve immunologic control of the lymphoma. Lymphoma is immunologically recognized. The immune system recognizes lymphoma as abnormal. It's just the lymphoma is winning the war, and we can tip the balance in favor of the immune system by doing these immune manipulations like a bone marrow transplant and other immune manipulations. So I would say for all of you guys, if you or your friends or people you know have dogs with lymphoma, there is a hope for them. You just have to have insurance if you have it, or if you have some resources, or if you have to do a GoFundMe, do it. A lot of people fund the whole thing with a GoFundMe, and you know, just do it. The other thing I would say is that if somebody's got lymphoma, if you have a dog who's related to that individual, then allow them to be typed as a potential donor. Because if we don't have donors, then we sometimes will come to a brick wall and not be able to get through. So if someone brings up a question about potential donor, then participate with that. About 25% of close relatives are expected to be a genetic match, and some distant relatives, if they are within 4 generations, are also expected to be matching in reducing percentages. And then sooner or later, there will be those dogs who are available uh, to individuals who aren't related. There'll be dogs that aren't in an immediate genetic pool, and they will be donor dogs. And that happens all the time in humans. They identify donors out of the World Book, and in dogs one day we'll have a World Book. And if the Scotties wanted to all get together and make their own World Book, that would be a great idea too. So everyone's sending in some blood, having their DNA identified, and figuring out who matches amongst others in the whole population of Scotties. And the Scotties could be the first dog World Book. And this so for me, what I would like to do is continue to develop these transplant procedures for dogs, minimize the toxicity of them the best I can, maximize the positive outcomes the best I can, and make it available to the largest number of dogs that I can by having a large potential donor pool. Okay? So what I would like to do, you guys, I'm going to go to work right now. So if you have questions, you can email them to me, and either myself or Derek or someone here will answer them. Robert can also help answer questions because he's super knowledgeable about this whole thing right now. And if you guys feel like you want an avenue to help, then tell me that, and I'll give you an avenue to help for continuing to help us do this work that we're doing. Okay? I can't really tell who's watching or listening, but like I said, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't need to do this. Okay? We'll see you guys.
Thanks, Dr. Sullivan. Yeah.
Thank
You
you
guys
very
hear
much.
me? You guys heard all that?
We sure
Awesome.
did. There wasn't a second of buffering.
Beautiful. All right. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so recommended pet insurance companies. Yeah, so I know there's at least two that I'm aware of that will cover it. One was called Spot, and the other is Lemonade. Have you heard of those? There could be others, but I'm aware of at least those two that have come through here, and they've had the procedure covered. So those will. We would have, like I said, Wally he's coming up on 11 here pretty soon. So we got Wally a long time ago. Back then, pet insurance just wasn't as prominent of a thing. We didn't know any better. I had no idea that lymphoma is so prominent in Scotties. I didn't know, I didn't even know that pet insurance existed, to be honest. Otherwise, we would have done it. But just because we didn't doesn't mean that in my mind, Wally shouldn't have to pay for that. So we did what we thought was the right thing, and we saved him. And that's what I would have wanted someone to do for me. So yeah, Lemonade and Spot at least. And I'm going to type my email address in. It's also in the presentation, but I'm going to put it right here
In the chat. Great.
So if you have questions, concerning whether it's insurance providers or anything else related to any of this, just email me, and I can get back to you. I'll also talk to Derek, who does a lot of the. Like I said, that guy gets his hands dirty big time, and he does a lot of heavy lifting. He's a beast. He may know about other insurance providers too. So I can get that information to you offline.
Great. Robert, is Wally still in the room with you?
He is not, but I'll grab him real quick.
Okay.
1 second.
While Robert is getting Wally, I just want to say a couple of things about the pet insurance piece. First of all, everybody needs to really do their own homework and do their own research. And I will say that I personally have had pet insurance on every single one of my 8 Scottish Terriers since they were puppies, or whenever we brought them in from a rescue organization. We personally have always had pet insurance. So this is going back, 30 some years ago. The first pet insurance that existed was veterinary pet insurance out of Anaheim, California. They have been bought out by Nationwide. And I will say that I have found Nationwide to be very wonderful to work with. So just so you know that.
Wally is getting his ears cleaned right now. He's a little bit drunk.
Yay, Wally. Oh, is he adorable? Hi, you guys. Thank you.
Hi.
So this is Derek and Alex. These were the 2 of the famous members of Wally's care team that I'd mentioned earlier. These guys are studs. Yeah. Look at that tongue hanging out. He's kind of drunk right now. Good boy.
Can see his eyes.
Good boy.
Yeah.
So Wally doesn't have a whole lot to say right now. He will later when he pees on my pillow or something. Yeah, I'll pay for that, I'm sure, but it's worth it.
The other thing, I just want to address one other thing that someone asked about, and I think Marcia is still on the call, but someone asked about, could the Health Trust Fund help? Well, the way that you can help is by talking with us at the Health Trust Fund and getting your dog's blood, a sample of your dog's blood, sent to our DNA bank, which is now located in Indiana. So if you have questions about that process, you can email I'll give you the address in the message. It's DNA bank at Gmail. Now, I will tell you that since we moved all of the samples from the first DNA bank that we had in Utah, and we moved them all to this new company in Indiana. And one of the reasons we've done that is so that ultimately hopefully within the next 6 months, we'll be able to start getting global sample submissions arranged, because there's a company that has labs across the pond, et cetera. And so we're going to be expanding our DNA bank, hopefully, in the not too distant future. The other thing that's changed when we stopped collecting samples, so right now we have close to 960 or 980 samples of dog DNA banked, of Scottie DNA banked. The other thing that's changed is now we're going to be asking for those blood samples to be shipped overnight, and that's going to be very expensive. So the best way that we're going to be looking at sending out some new recommendations is for people to probably gather, put an ad in your paper if anybody's got a Scottish Terrier. If you'll join together and get, blood drawn on 6 dogs at one time, and all those tubes get shipped at one spot, or in one sample box, then it's going to be much cheaper than costing you $50 or $75 or $100, depending upon where you live, to ship that sample in overnight. So watch the Facebook page for the Health Trust Fund of the STCA. That's our organization's name. It's not the STCA Health Trust Fund. It's the Health Trust Fund of the STCA. Watch our Facebook page. Send me an email about that, and we'll keep you posted about when we're going to be able to send information out about that to you. Okay. And then the other thing I want you to know is why it's so important for you to contribute your dog's DNA to that bank is all the almost 1,000 samples that we have in right now. What happens is we are now contacting veterinarians in the community and veterinarians in institutions, research veterinarians. We now can go out to those folks who are research scientists and recruit them to do particular studies. And we can now do that because of donations that the Health Trust Fund receives. We now have funding available to fund some of these research projects. So please, communicate that, let people know about that, etc. Okay. Is there a health trust fund for other breeds? Yes, there are health foundations or whatever for other breeds. And you would have to just, Google that if you've got another dog or friends who have another dog. Okay. So Robert, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. Even in tears again. It's so inspiring. And you and Lisa and Stephanie and the dogs have got to come to the Scottie Rally next May. You just
I'd love to. As my sister calls it, the Scottie Convention. Yeah, that would be great. We would love to.
Yeah. I have one other favor to ask of you, and you can just message me this afterwards. If you can find out if the clinic, do they like coffee there? And if they do they like it ground? Do they like regular? Do they like flavored? As we have Door County Coffee Company is here, and we would very much like to send them some. And
okay,
you and Stephanie as well.
I'll find out and let you know. Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm sure they'd love it because they don't sleep, so they have to have some kind of caffeine addiction at this point.
Yeah.
I don't see a way around that one. Yeah, thank you, Michelle. That's thank you very much for that.
You are a hero for me.
Oh, I just try to be the guy that my dog thinks I am.
I'm pretty sure you're better than that, actually, except for that photo you sent me before today.
Yeah. The one where it pretty much guarantees that I'm going to need a new pillow tomorrow. Yeah. For those wondering, it was a picture of Wally in a gym bag.
Yeah, not looking very happy.
Yeah, I'm a pay, and that's cool. That's cool. He's alive to make me pay, so that's what counts.
Yeah. And today is the 1-year anniversary, correct?
That's right. So actually today is the day that we harvested the stem cells from Brother Bennett. Yeah. And like I said, Brother Brett Bennett is a Golden Gate Scottish Terrier Rescue alumni. You know, Lisa rescued him, I guess 3 years ago now. So if you're in the Bay, GGSTR, also don't forget about them. You know, donate, help, volunteer. They have Golden Gate Scottish Terrier Rescue.org. So they need all help they can get too.
Yeah. All right, you guys, if you have any other questions, feel free to unmute or put them in the chat. I think we're, oh, go ahead, Robert.
One other thing I was to say for Facebook users, particularly Scottie owners, there's a Facebook group called Nothing But Scotties. I think is that the right? Yeah. So
Yes.
I'm in there, and a lot of the details concerning Wally's journey have been a lot of them were documented there. So if you want to see like the day by day kind of how things were going, you could probably just search for like Wally Chronicles, because I always used that phrase at the beginning so that it would be easy for me to find all of my posts. So search for Wally Chronicles in Nothing But Scotties, and you can see the whole thing start to finish. Great. Including me torching people for saying things like, but it's just a dog. I mean, nobody in Nothing But Scotties said that to me, but if they did, that it would have, yeah. You can imagine how I would have reacted to that. But.
Well, all right, Robert, I'm going to draw things to a close because it's we're at almost 2 hours now. So, and we pretty much kept almost everyone that tuned in. This will be posted on our ZOOMIE site on our webpage, so you can watch for that. It'll probably be up by tomorrow at the latest. Okay. Thank you very much, Robert. Huge thank you to Wally and the team there. And thank you to all of you who've tuned in today.
Can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
Before you guys all leave, please remember, donations make a difference. Donate to DCSR to help support these Zoomies. DCSR contributes to many of these rescues, Golden Gate, one of them, Health Trust Fund. The dollars add up. If it's $10, $20, anything, please remember DCSR. We give back to the Scottish Terrier community, and blessings to you, Robert, and to Wally, and to the team there in Bellingham, Washington. You guys are doing amazing, amazing work.
Thank you, Arnell. Great job as our treasurer for DCSR. All righty, you guys. With that, let's all give a hearty, let's all unmute and do an aroo for Wally and Robert. Everybody unmute. Come on, you guys, don't let me be the only one.
Did you unmute?
Yeah. Dono, you haven't unmuted here. You keep giving us that thumbs up. Okay, I'm going to start one more time. 1, 2, 3.
Aroo!
There we go.
My little Katie's joining in. All right, you guys, take care.
All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.